I'm Ryan. I'm a science teacher.
I'm Cheryl, and I slept through science.
Each episode will tackle a science question you may have learned in school, but can't quite remember or fully explain.
And I'll take the risk of asking the dumb questions so that we can all understand the science we slept through.
The bell has rung. Let's get started. Welcome to Lesson 15. We're in our hot and cold unit. Cheryl, what question are we answering today?
Oh, it's a fun one, Ryan.
Okay.
Because this is another Cheryl's science memories from the past, which eventually we're going to need like a jingle for, or I'm picturing like an echoey voice. It's like Cheryl's science memories of the past, or
yeah.
something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Something epic like that.
Yes. I want to talk about liquid nitrogen because I have two very specific memories of liquid nitrogen.
Oh, two memories.
Yes. So you know one of them because you were there.
I was.
And that was so fun. This is why everyone should be friends with a science teacher, because I was in town and we were going to hang out and you were like, hey, I have this big old container of liquid nitrogen. Do you want to play with it and also make ice cream? And it was like, well, duh. So that was very fun. I did learn a little bit about it when we did that. My other memory goes back to my childhood when I had some warts on my feet.
Ooh, yes.
And my mom tried a lot of things. And eventually she asked if I wanted to go to the doctor and get them burned off.
Mm-hmm.
And I said yes. And they used something, which I later learned was liquid nitrogen, to burn, I'm saying in quotes, off the warts. It was very effective. It was definitely painful. But that was my first time seeing liquid nitrogen, actually, was a doctor using it on me. Yeah. So what's the deal with liquid nitrogen?
What's the deal with liquid nitrogen? That's the official question.
Yes.
What's the deal? All right. Well, let's start with our pre-assessment. What are some things that you already know about liquid nitrogen? You've had a couple of different experiences with it. One you were younger, one when you were a little bit older, but in very different contexts. Yeah. So what things do you know or think you know or wonder about liquid nitrogen?
Well, I don't think they were actually burning my warts.
Okay.
I don't think burning is the correct word for that. But it was a very similar sensation, which is something, I mean, this kind of bleeds into last week's lesson when we were talking about, with dry ice and just like things being at a different temperature and being very extreme and weird in our air temperature, like room temperature. So this feels similar to that like liquid nitrogen is something that at a very, very cold state is still only in liquid form. And then in like our normal temperature that we live in, it turns into a gas.
Okay.
Which then feels like the purpose, like for example, my lovely warts, the purpose of that, I'm not sure if it was the nitrogen doing something to the warts that was actually helping it, or if it was the fact that it was a liquid substance that was very, very cold and freezing them in a weird way. And then really it doesn't even matter what substance it was. It's just more the point that it was something very cold that was freezing them. Like, could you take dry ice and do the same thing to someone's warts? And, would that still be as effective? So I'm not sure if there's like some property of nitrogen that makes that special, or if it's really just like, here's this weird substance that is liquid in a very cold state and we can use it in this way. And then when you and I played with it, we were very scientific and we dipped a rose into it and then smashed it on the table, which is very fun. It will be on our social media. People should check it out. And that worked because it like froze the rose and got it like wet and frozen, not just frozen, the rose was already frozen, actually. Um, it got it wet and frozen at the temperature of the nitrogen, which who knows how cold that is. You probably do. And that's what made it then like shatter when it was hit against a table, similar to if you had a very thin sheet of water ice and then you hit it on the table, it would shatter. So that's like why it did that. But then the other fun thing is you dipped a graham cracker in it and then you ate it and then you blew, in quotes again, smoke out of your nose and you looked like a dragon. But really you were blowing either vapor or gas out of your nose because it was turning to gas. It was like changing form from liquid. It was heating up a lot very quickly. And we made ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
And we just like literally poured it in a bowl and then it was like instantly evaporating. I think it was evaporating. And then
What was evaporating?
the nitrogen.
Okay.
And then the cream was getting cold very quickly. And there's actually a store that does that, like an ice cream shop called Sub-Zero in Federal Way.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. Field trip.
I was gonna say we should
Field
go.
Trip. So those are the things I know about liquid nitrogen.
That's quite a lot.
Yeah, it is.
Let's dive in, shall we?
Okay.
First thing, let's just start with what is nitrogen, because I think that's a good place to start.
Okay.
You talked about how you're like, you talked about how nitrogen is a gas at room temperature.
Mm-hmm.
And that is completely correct. As a matter of fact, it is most of the gas in the room that you're in right now.
Oh.
Okay. Nitrogen makes up 78% of Earth's atmosphere.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
much
it's like
higher than oxygen.
Well, oh yeah. Oxygen's only like 20 something, 18. I don't remember what that is. I'd have to look it up.
Interesting.
But it's not a huge number. So nitrogen is literally everywhere. And so if we were to take the nitrogen on Earth and make it cold enough to make all of the nitrogen liquid, we would have all been dead long before that because of how cold that would be.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Right. So yes. So you're also like, I think it's very, very cold. And that is true. It is colder than dry ice. So our last lesson, we talked about dry ice and kind of how cold that was. Liquid nitrogen is even colder. And so to give you some specific numbers for reference, dry ice was negative 109 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay. Which is very cold.
It is very cold. Liquid nitrogen is negative 320 degrees Fahrenheit.
Ooh.
So it's 3 times colder than dry ice.
Wow.
Yeah.
But how do they make it cold? You can't just like, even though it's in the air, you can't just like freeze a tube.
That's correct. When you make things really, really cold like that, for dry ice as well, you actually have to use some tricks. You can't just lower the temperature or put it in the fridge. Yeah. Because how did you get the fridge that cold, right? All of those things. Yeah. So you actually have to play with the pressure.
Oh, okay.
And we can talk about that in another lesson if you're interested. Like, why does pressure relate to temperature? Because that is a very interesting thing that kind of builds on some of this as well, because it does. Pressure and temperature are very, very closely related. But if you increase or decrease the pressure on something, you can actually change its temperature. So they used that to get things really, really cold.
So I can make liquid nitrogen in my Instant Pot.
Well, yes, that's exactly what I mean. 100%. No, but you're right that Instant Pots deal with pressure, and that actually is partly why they do, because then they can play with temperature also. That's why they can cook things faster, is because they've increased the temperature. Increase the pressure, which allows the temperature to increase more quickly, plus a whole bunch of other things. But that's another topic. So let's talk about warts,
Okay.
everybody's favorite topic. You talked about how the warts, you weren't sure what was actually killing the warts, whether it was the
Yes.
nitrogen or if it was the fact that it was cold.
Yeah.
Knowing that most of what you breathe in every day, your entire life, is actually nitrogen, which do you think is the answer?
It's the fact that it's cold.
Yes,
It's
exactly
just
right.
something that they have that's accessible that is cold that they can use.
Yeah, and I mean, again, nitrogen makes up most of our atmosphere. So there's an easy access to nitrogen, right? It's not like you
Yeah.
have to go hunting for it or dig it up out of the ground or anything like that. There's a lot of nitrogen around that's relatively easy to access. And a lot of different labs and welding companies and a lot of different places use liquid nitrogen for lots of different things.
Really?
So,
That's
yeah,
cool.
yeah. So it's relatively common, not obviously everyday person common, but it's not hard to come by. So that's another reason that you could use that. But
Nice.
really, what's happening? Why does it work to cool something down? And you talked about how it's not really burning, and it's true, it's not burning. What you're doing is you're finding a way to kill the cells themselves. And you do that by freezing them because cells are mostly water,
Oh, okay. Yeah. That makes
right?
sense. Mm-hmm.
We have a fancy word in biology. We call it the cytoplasm. That's sort of the liquid that's inside of a cell, but it's mostly water, and water freezes. And if you freeze water, it forms crystals, like little tiny crystals. And those little crystals on a really, really tiny scale tend to be very jagged and sharp. And so when you freeze all of the water inside a cell, that water, remember how we talked about how water expands when it freezes?
Yes.
Well, it'll do that in a cell, and it'll be with jagged edges. So it will actually poke holes and pop cells when it freezes them, which kills them.
That's how
Yeah, that's what
I just
frostbite
pictured
is.
I just pictured this little cell and
Mm-hmm.
he gets so cold that he's like, I'm just gonna keel over and die. So he just lays down and kind of just like
Goes to sleep.
becomes no more, goes to sleep in the
Yeah.
snow
Mm-hmm.
because he's so cold. I
Yeah.
didn't know that they were like popping holes in
Yeah.
things.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's
Mm-hmm.
so crazy.
It is. So that's what actually is killing the cells.
Wow.
That's also the reason you talked about the rose when you and I were playing with some liquid nitrogen. I mean, doing some very intentional learning
Yes.
about liquid
Yes.
nitrogen.
Science.
Science. And I put a rose in the liquid nitrogen for a while, and it bubbled and did all these great things. Then I took it out and smashed it on the counter, and it shattered, kind of not quite like glass, but kind of like glass.
Yeah.
It's the exact same thing happening there. All of the water inside all of the cells froze. And so it became very, very rigid. So even though, yes, and you mentioned this, that you knew that the flour was already frozen because it was a solid.
Yes.
Nice job, by the way.
Thanks.
Yeah. And that's true. But on the cellular level, the flour was not frozen. It was mostly liquid inside the cell.
Oh.
Right. And so you freeze it at the cellular level, make it all frozen, and then it's incredibly rigid. And like you said, it shattered kind of like the way ice does when you smash it. And that's because that's literally what we were doing. We were smashing ice, but just on little tiny cell amounts of ice all stacked together inside the flour.
Wow. That's cool.
It's very cool. And that's also why, I don't know if you remember, but after it smashes and then warms up, you pick it up again and it's not hard and it's not cold and it actually is a little mushy. I don't know if you remember that or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because now you've also exploded a bunch of those cells. And so those things that are nice and rigid and hold place next to each other are a little bit more blech-y because the cell structure has been broken down.
Oh, I thought it was just because they had gotten wet. So it was kind of like cereal sitting in milk.
Well, and they are wet because the water that was in the cells, once it warmed up again, started to leak out. But it's not wet from the liquid nitrogen because the liquid nitrogen isn't really wet per se, because it, like you mentioned, it evaporates right away. It goes into a gas.
Oh. Interesting. Cool.
I can see there's a lot of processing going on right now. Wait a minute.
It's just so funny to me that I thought I was like, "Oh, yeah, it's wet because it was in, like, something liquid." That's what
Yeah.
happens when something is in liquid, is it gets all mushy afterwards, but it was a different
Yeah.
reason. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little surprising, but like we said, cool. So then the last piece, oh, actually, one more thing. You asked about the warts. Could you do it with dry ice?
I'm gonna guess yes, but not quite as effectively because it's just not as cold.
And I think, yes. Also, I think the other reason that they use liquid nitrogen is because it is a liquid. So they can take whatever their doctor grade Q-tip is, and it
Mhm.
can absorb that liquid nitrogen into it because it is a liquid. And then they hold it on the wart,
Yeah.
which is a whole lot easier than if you had a piece of dry ice, because the dry ice is going to sublimate, turn into a gas, and get smaller and smaller and smaller as you
Oh,
hold
yeah.
it. Whereas if you have the Q-tip, even though, yes, the liquid nitrogen is also going to evaporate, at least you still have something that you can hold onto the wart.
That makes sense.
So I think it's a combination of those. But yes,
Mm.
I think conceivably you could also do it with dry ice because it's also cold enough to give you frostbite and make your cells explode and all those things.
Wow.
Yeah. Then the last piece, what I think is your favorite and is definitely my favorite, is the graham cracker. What did you call me? A dragon?
Yes. Yes.
The graham cracker dragon.
Yes. The graham cracker
So
dragon.
to describe, and again, we'll post this on social media for people, but to describe it, I took just a piece of graham cracker, dipped it into a cup of liquid nitrogen for, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds, 45 seconds, something like that. Took it out, tried to kind of shake off any of the liquid nitrogen left. So it wasn't so much that it was in liquid nitrogen or that there was liquid nitrogen in the graham cracker as much as it was just very, 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 very cold. Right. I
Mm.
dropped the temperature and then I put it in my mouth and ate it and was chewing on it. And what you can do is you can get, and you put steam in quotes.
Mm-hmm.
Based on what we talked about with dry ice, what do you think that probably was?
Vapor.
Yes.
Because you wouldn't see it as a gas.
Right. So yeah, so water vapor, so little tiny droplets of water, and it's just the water in my mouth and in my
Oh,
nose.
it's water vapor. I thought it
Yes.
was nitrogen
Mm-mm.
vapor.
So just like with dry ice, where what you're seeing coming
Is
off
the
of the dry
water.
ice is the water. It's literally the exact same thing as with dry ice, the exact same cause, exact same reason,
Oh.
because it's so cold that any of the water that's in the air that comes in contact with that really cold stuff immediately turns to a liquid, or maybe even little tiny crystals, but I think it's mostly liquid. It cools it down so quickly. And so then I could blow it out my nose or out my mouth or whatever.
Love it. And I'm now remembering when you did that, I got to actually see the liquid nitrogen and it was bubbling because it was boiling.
Correct.
So
Yes.
weird. So weird. To see a boiling liquid and be like, that would freeze your hand, not burn your hand if you touched
Exactly.
it.
Yes.
And then the ice cream.
The ice cream. You feel like that's important?
Well, you said my favorite part, and the
True.
part where I got to eat was pretty
Get to eat the
good.
ice cream. Yeah. And so again, it's just harnessing all of those same things where it's freezing just like it was everything else, except now it's freezing the water and the other liquids that are in the milk and the half and half and whatever it was we put in the liquid. It's just so cold that it freezes it really fast, like almost instantaneously. I don't know if you remember when we put it in the bowl and how, I don't remember how long we had to
Stirred it.
stir,
Mm-hmm.
but it didn't have to stir very long.
Yeah.
Like, Was it ready in like a minute, maybe?
Yeah, it was pretty quick.
Yeah. Whereas if you've ever made homemade ice cream, either in an ice cream machine or whatever, I mean, it could take 30, 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And we did it in like a minute.
Yeah. That was fun.
It was fun. I agree with that. Quiz time, Cheryl.
Oh man, not again. Every time.
Yes, literally every time, and it will continue to be every time. So should be used to it by now.
Okay, fine.
All righty. First question. How do we know that nitrogen on its own isn't dangerous?
Because it's in the air and all around us and everywhere.
Wonderful. Yes, it is. Second question. How does liquid nitrogen kill warts?
By freezing the cells, and the cells then explode themselves.
And what in the cells is freezing?
The water in the cells is spiking the cell from the inside.
Is that the spiking dance?
This is the spiking dance.
Anyone who's listening to audio and not watching us on YouTube, you may want to jump over to our YouTube channel to see the spiking dance that Cheryl has done. It will make all of the difference in your ability to understand this.
Yes, this is true.
Okay. How are wart removal and roses similar to each other?
Oh, this question out of context is something.
Isn't it?
I mean, warts and roses both have water in their cells.
Okay.
That can freeze and be damaged by dying or by shattering. They can be affected, very similarly by the liquid nitrogen.
Yeah, the liquid water in their cells. Yep, and freezes. You got it. You're like, I don't. Yeah. Last question. Why can liquid nitrogen allow you to be a graham cracker dragon?
Because since it's harmless, you can consume some of it. I mean, if you just like poured it on your tongue,
it don't would
freeze your tongue.
Yeah,
but like you can dip your food in it and still consume that food. So that's part of it.
Okay.
And then also it makes the graham cracker that has been dipped in the liquid nitrogen so cold. How cold is it? So cold that it freezes the water that is in the air or in your mouth and your nose, so that when you breathe out of your nose, you are breathing out water vapor that makes you look like a dragon.
Yes. And I would say it probably condenses as opposed to freezes, but yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair.
Probably a liquid as opposed to a solid, but there might be solids in there too, little tiny crystals.
Yay.
I also feel like I should probably say, I don't recommend or endorse all of the things that we have talked about unless you know what you're doing. Don't just go out. I mean, not just anybody can get liquid nitrogen, but the whole like dipping the graham cracker in and things like that, like you have to be careful because you can, like you mentioned, you can burn your tongue. We use it to burn warts off of people's feet, right? So again, burn, not actually burning. It's actually like frostbite, but we for some reason use the term burn. But like, yes, freeze, and you could seriously hurt yourself with it. So be careful. But I'm a trained professional. I am.
Okay.
I'm a professional science teacher.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I am a trained professional science teacher. Laughing at me.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you are.
Did you get hurt when we were doing experiments with liquid nitrogen?
No.
There you go.
And the ice cream was delicious.
And the ice cream was delicious. You're welcome. We are out of time for our lesson today. So why don't you go ahead and pack up your stuff and get ready for my closing remarks. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at I Slept Through Science or on Twitter at Slept Science.
If you have dumb science questions like I do, please send them to us. You can email us at isleptthroughscience@gmail.com, or you can even send us a voice memo and we'll play it on the podcast.
Please rate and review our podcast to tell other people what you think about it, subscribe to make sure you don't miss an episode, and share about our podcast on social media.
Thank you to Beth Reed Miller for the artwork. You can check out more of Beth's artwork at Beth Is Something. Okay, great. Thanks. Bye.
The bell doesn't dismiss you. I dismiss you.